I'm pretty sure you have already heard about déjà vu, a psychological phenomenon where a moment seems familiar but has never happened before. And what if I told you that there is a feeling which is the exact opposite? You're writing a simple word, something you're reading countless times before, nothing special at all, but after repeating it a few times, something strange happens. The word suddenly looks wrong, as if you're seeing it for the first time. And this strange experience is called Jamais Vu, or Jamais Vu in French. Let's see more about it in this video. As I said, Jamais Vu is the feeling that something familiar suddenly becomes unfamiliar. A place you've seen hundreds of times, a word you know perfectly well, even your own handwriting. For a brief moment, something feels off. Your brain knows it should recognize what it's looking at, but the sense of familiarity simply isn't there. The object hasn't changed and your memory hasn't disappeared, but the connection between what you're seeing and the feeling of knowing it briefly fades. If déjà vu is the strange sensation that something new feels familiar, jamais vu is the opposite. Something familiar suddenly feels completely new. It's a real moment where your brain stops recognizing something it should clearly recognize. And when this happens, it can feel surprisingly unsettling, because for a few seconds your own perception feels unreliable. The term jamais vu comes from French and literally means never seen, even though you've clearly seen it before. Psychologists believe jamais vu happens when the brain temporarily disconnects recognition from perception. From a neurological perspective, jamais vu is thought to involve a temporary disruption in the brain's familiarity processing system. Recognition normally depends on interactions between memory-related regions of the brain, particularly structures in the medial temporal lobe, which help generate the feeling that something has been encountered before. When these systems momentarily fail to synchronize with what the brain is currently perceiving, the object is still processed visually, but the signal that normally produces familiarity becomes weaker or delayed. As a result, something that should feel instantly recognizable can briefly lose that sense of familiarity, even though the underlying memory is still intact. In other words, your eyes still see the object, your brain still processes the image, but the part of your mind responsible for the feeling of familiarity briefly stops responding the way it usually does. It's almost like your brain loses access to the label it normally attaches to things. The object is still there and you know what it is, but the sense of knowing disappears for a moment. And that teeny disconnect can make ordinary things suddenly feel strange, almost as if you're encountering them for the first time. Interestingly, one of the most common ways people experience jamais vu involves something extremely simple: repeating a word. Imagine writing the same word again and again. At first, everything looks normal. The word feels familiar, you recognize every letter instantly. But if you keep repeating it, something unusual can happen. The word slowly begins to feel strange. You might start wondering if the spelling is wrong, or if the word even looks like a real word anymore. Even though you've known that word for your entire life, it suddenly feels unfamiliar. Many people experience this when writing quickly during school exams, or when repeating a word out loud too many times. At some point, the word stops feeling like language and starts feeling like a random collection of sounds or shapes. This is one of the simplest examples of jamais vu. We have an example for that. Researchers explored how repetition can affect our sense of familiarity. Participants were asked to repeatedly write a simple word, something ordinary like the word door. They wrote it over and over again, sometimes dozens of times, and at first nothing unusual happened. But after a while, many participants began reporting something strange. The word started to feel unfamiliar. Some said it looked wrong, others said it stopped feeling like a real word entirely, and a few participants even described the experience as slightly disturbing, because they knew the word perfectly well. And yet, for a brief moment, it stopped feeling familiar. And what makes this experiment fascinating is that the participants' memory was still intact. They hadn't forgotten the word, They could still read it and they could still understand it, but the feeling of recognition had temporarily disappeared. And that is exactly what Jamais Vu is. But Jamais Vu doesn't only happen with words. It can also happen with actions you perform every day. Imagine tying your shoes, something you've done thousands of times before since you were a child. But suddenly you stop and think about it. Which loop goes first? Which string crosses over? For a moment, something that was completely automatic suddenly feels confusing. This happens because many of our daily actions rely on automatic brain processes. When we suddenly become aware of those processes, the brain temporarily loses that sense of automatic familiarity. And the action that once felt effortless can briefly become unfamiliar. Experience like Jamais Vu reveals something important about how the brain works. Recognition isn't just about memory. It's also about a feeling your brain constantly produces. Every moment of your life, your brain is predicting what it expects to see. Your surroundings, objects, words, faces, everything. These predictions help the brain process information quickly and efficiently. Instead of analyzing every detail from scratch, your brain relies on past experience to instantly recognize things, because it's easier. And that's why you can look at a familiar place and understand it immediately, or read words on a page without thinking about every letter. And the contrary also happens. Because when your brain doesn't know something, it gets harder for it to imagine something completely new. Imagine the face of a person you've never seen before. You might be thinking about it now and saying, okay, I've never seen this person, I am creating the image in my mind right now, but I'm pretty sure you've seen this person before or very similar, but you can't remember because your brain can't create a face of a person it hasn't seen. It's like trying to imagine a new color. It's a little bit different because new colors basically do not exist, but if you think about it, things that are supposed to be simple are not because how our brain works. But returning to the topic of Jamais Vu here, when that happens, something strange occurs. The word itself doesn't change, but the way our brain processes it does. And when that system glitches, the familiar can suddenly become unfamiliar. A word you've known for years can start looking wrong, and as I mentioned before, even your own handwriting can briefly look strange. And when the system resets, everything feels normal again, in a matter of seconds or milliseconds. The word looks correct. The sense of recognition returns. Sometimes we don't even pay attention to these feelings because they're really, really fast. They happen in a matter of some seconds, and if you don't pay attention, you won't realize it. But when you realize, you stop to think about it and how interesting it is, how our psychology works, and how our brain is actually there working, and it also has its little fails, you know what I mean? All of that reveals us something. The feeling of knowing something is not as stable as it seems. It's something your brain constantly creates in the background, a silent process that allows the word to feel familiar. Think about how many times you recognize instantly every day your house, your street, the way certain words look on a page. You rarely stop to think about it. Your brain simply recognizes them automatically. But experiences like Jamais Vu remind us that this sense of familiarity isn't permanent. It's something the brain actively generates every moment. Then occasionally, that system briefly stops working the way it normally does. When that happens, something very ordinary can suddenly feel strange. And this shows us how our perception of word it's constantly being constructed by our own minds in a natural process. Despite being very weird, it's really interesting to feel it. But now, I want to make an experiment here before we finish the video. You can make this and try to feel this inside your house right now. So let's try it. We can do like the first experiment we saw in the beginning of the video. So take a piece of paper and write the same word over and over again, like 10 to 20 times non-stop. You can choose the word, but choose a word that you normally speak every day, not a different word, but a familiar word. And write it slowly again and again, and after a while, pay attention to how the word begins to look. For many people, something strange happens, but the number of times you will have to write it depends on each one, so just try it. And you can also say a word out loud. Choose a word and say it out loud sometimes until it sounds weird, so you can understand how this feeling actually feels. And it's really interesting how we can make these things in our own house by ourselves. Before starting producing this video, I didn't know about this Jamais Vu experience. I only knew Déjà Vu. But now, knowing both sides of this experience of knowing something or not knowing something, how our brain works with both of them, it's actually really more interesting. So I really hope you guys like the video. If you realize my voice is a little weird in this video because I have a bit of a cold, but I'm getting better, so my voice will be better in the next one. Thank you for watching till here. Bye.